and to give it the oxygen, the nourishment, the hydration that it needs. And here we are. We're learning the Kosher Crash Course. And today we're learning about managing meat and milk on same surfaces and spaces. We're learning today about not cooked together, not hot together, just cold together. Manage a kitchen. How do you manage a kosher kitchen? Meat and milk, and they're in the same space. How do you keep them safe without getting into trouble? I see the signals picking up. I see Corey's with me. How's the signal, Corey, on Facebook? Could you just give me a little indication that the signal is good? Hopefully, I'm in a new Wi-Fi space. YouTube is not picking up, as far as I'm aware, and I want to make sure that you're picking up the signal. Not looking very promising right now. Corey, are you still there? Elaine is with me on YouTube, so that's good. Elaine, is the signal strong on YouTube? Just give me some indication that I'm doing okay. Well, I see the numbers are picking up a little bit. So I'm just going to keep on going. Good morning, Rob Berger. Nice to see you, my friend. Shalom Aleichem. Good. Fantastic. Okay, we're coming together. Hopefully the signal is better today. Good morning, Adrian. Corey says, sounds good. Fantastic. Thank you very much. So let's do this. We're learning today about keeping meat and milk together, coexisting with meat and milk in the same space. How do you manage that? Do you need two separate kitchens? Do you need two completely different sets of everything? Or can you have one kitchen table? Is it okay to have one refrigerator? We know you need two sinks. We know you need two ovens. How do you manage with meat and milk in the same space and surfaces? Good morning, Hannah. It's wonderful to have you with us. Thank you, Elaine. Good. All right. So you got to be careful that when you put down the meat and the milk in the same place, or meat foods and dairy foods, wherever they are, to make sure that they never are touching each other and never in a way that they could fall one into the other. For example, in the refrigerator, if you have something leaking from one shelf to the next shelf, it becomes a big problem, because then if they touch, or if they leak or spill one into the other, what happens is, if you don't wash it, you'll be effectively eating the meat and the milk together, which is the biblical prohibition. Another potential problem we spoke about in recent classes is that the meat and the milk get cooked together either through heat or through being spicy together for 18 minutes, or by just sitting in liquid for 24 hours. So imagine you got a refrigerator and a little bit of milk falls into the steak below, and it sits there for 24 hours. It's like it cooked into it. You got to be careful of that. So you got to be careful in the refrigerator, being, like I just mentioned, not to put them one on top of the other, so it shouldn't drip. You also want to make sure that when you put stuff into the refrigerator, you're not putting it into some sort of a puddle or a dirty place. You know, in the refrigerator, sometimes it's narrow shelves. You pick things up, it gets like a little stain where you don't see it at the top of the shelf, right? Next thing you know, you're putting a milk pie down in the same spot, and you've touched it, and it's got the meat and the milk. It's terrible. That's what you got to be very, very careful of. When you go shopping, you also have to be careful that you separate the meat and the milk in different bags, so that they don't get mixed up. Because again, you're buying something, it might drip, it might leak. Who knows what's going on in your milk bottle, right? Or some sort of cheese or something, it spills into another thing, you got a problem. However, if they're properly sealed, properly closed, in such a way that you don't really have to worry about it. If that's the case, you can put them in the same shelf, put them in the same box, you can put them in the same bag. It's not a problem. So if it's properly sealed, you don't have to worry about putting the meat and the milk near each other in close proximity, where there's no concern for touching. Because again, the problem is if they touch and you don't wash it later, you're going to effectively be eating meat and milk together. Good morning, Marty. I hope today's signal is better than yesterday. Now, what about different kinds of foods that are not meat and milk, putting them together with meat or with milk? So foods that are eaten as they are, parif, like baked goods, candies, sweets, right? You shouldn't put them together with meat foods or dairy foods, because we're concerned that today it's sitting with the cream cheese, right? But tomorrow, because this food is eaten as a parif manner, therefore we worried that tomorrow you might eat it with the other side. For example, a jar of mayonnaise. Mayonnaise is used for, meat, for milk, whatever, right? Use it for your burger, use it for something else, for dairy. If the mayonnaise is in close contact with the meat, let's say you put it on the burger and you weren't worried about the knife, the same knife that had a little meat in it just went into the mayonnaise. Tomorrow, when you use it for some dairy dish, that's the problem. You got to be very, very, very conscious of that. However, foods that are usually washed or peeled before they're eaten, for example, vegetables or fruits or fish. You don't eat raw fish, right? You peel it. In such a case, you are allowed to put them near the meat or the milk, because even if they do touch the meat or the milk, and you'll want to eat them tomorrow with the other side, it's not a problem. You're going to be peeling them anyways before you eat them, and you wouldn't have a problem of the meat coming in close contact with the other brand. Okay, good. Please feel free to ask any questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you. What about the same table? So you're eating meat and you're eating milk on the same table. Not obviously the same person, because the same person does not eat meat and milk on the same table. But what happens if two people are sitting at the same table? We know about the mechitza in the synagogue, separating the men and the woman. It's not the only place where you have a mechitza. Where there's many, many places where you have to have a mechitza, a division, a separation. Let's see what happens. Our sages prohibited one table to be used for meat and for dairy foods at the same time, because you might forget and come to mix. And if you did it, what you should do is, if you realize that you already did it, just move it over as soon as you remember. But if you have a table or a counter or some sort of a counter, and there that's where the food normally sits before they're served. Over there, you are allowed to put together meats and dairy foods at the same time, because you're not worried that you're going to eat them unconsciously, because that's only a serving station. It's not an eating station, right? Where the food is served like in a buffet station, basically. We're not worried that you're going to forget. In the buffet, you're conscious of what you're putting on your plate. It's when you're eating, I think, that you become a little less conscious of what's going on. Maybe because you're enjoying the food. For this reason, you're allowed to put on a marble countertop, for example, meat foods and dairy foods, but you want to make sure that they're separated, that they're not actually mixed up, that you wouldn't even know the difference. By the way, you'll notice in the stores as well, a kosher store, a reputable kosher store, will make a nice division. I'm babysitting. A reputable kosher store will make a nice division between the meats and the dairy foods, right? But if it's not really a kosher store, if it's like a Publix or something, they wouldn't really know the difference, because there's nobody supervising. They wouldn't be able to differentiate. Obviously, in the store, it's not really a big deal because it's properly packaged, depending on what it looks like, actually. You got to be conscious of that. Now, what happens if two different people are eating at the same table? Here it goes. Two different people, they want to eat at the same table. Who knows? You're at like a diner, a deli, a lunchroom in school. One kid has a meat lunch, a kid has a dairy lunch. What do you do? Right? If they do not know each other, if they're strangers, it's not a problem, because it's highly unlikely that they'll be sharing their food, because they're strangers. But if they're friends, they may not eat on the same table, one meat, one dairy, because they're going to socialize. Food is where you socialize. There's a big problem with intermarriage over food. Where you eat is where you become social. And that's part of the reason why we have a concept called Pas Yisrael, which is bread baked by a Jew. We've learned about this in an earlier class of this kosher crash course, that one of the reasons for bread, probably the main reason for why bread has to be baked by a Jew, is because if you allow the bread to be baked by anyone, even if it's kosher ingredients, you'll likely come to assimilation. It starts off with a meal, but you got to be careful, right? You got to stick to your people. Right? If you're going to preserve the integrity of the Jewish nation, it starts with food, right? So if you know each other, if you're friends and you're sitting at the same table, you cannot have both meat and milk eaten by two different people if they know each other, because it's very likely that they'll come to socialize. Unless they make a mechitza. What's a mechitza on a table? A mechitza means a separation. It basically means a reminder. A heker. A heker means sort of a reminder that serves as a reminder for both of them that we don't cross over here. It can be made in one of two ways. Either a separate tablecloth, like a little placemat. It's a good practice in your home to have obviously tablecloth for meat, tablecloth for milk, but also have placemats. A placemat is a personal tablecloth, right? So that way you can have two people eating at the same table, but one has like a blue placemat, the other one has a red placemat. This is dairy, this is meat. It's very recognizable. Another way to do it, to make a separation, is by putting something that doesn't belong on the table with a little elevation, a little height. For example, if you put a vase of flowers on the table, it sort of belongs there. Most often, vase with flowers, vase with flowers, sit on the table, so that wouldn't really remind you. But if you put, I don't know, some sort of like a tefillin bag or something, you put a book on the table, you realize that doesn't belong here, and it teaches you, it reminds you that there's a difference. Or even a food, which you're not going to be eating during this meal, right? Like you put a bowl of cereal during a dinner time, you put something which you're not normally eating, that will serve as a reminder, right? Okay, I'm going to do one more piece over here, two more pieces, and that is like this. Different dishes for people that are eating meat and milk separately. Two people that are eating on the same table, one meat and one milk, in the manner which is prescribed as permissible moments ago. They've got to be careful that they do not mix any dishes or cutlery. Obviously, they can't mix the food, but even the dishes they can't mix. For example, they can't share a cup for obvious reasons, because you can have residue on this mouth and residue on that mouth, and that's obviously going to create the entire problem. Similarly, they cannot even share a salt shaker, not even a salt shaker. Why? Because when you shake the salt, sometimes you shake too aggressively, it lands on the food, and the cover of the salt shaker gets stuck in the meatballs, and then it goes to the other guy for his cereal, right? Obviously, it's needless to say that they can't share a piece of bread, a loaf of bread, because if they when they tear it off and they cut the knife, whatever, then the fingers that are covered with oil, meat oil or dairy oil, will get stuck in the bread, and obviously make the bread fleshig or mochak. Unless they slice the bread earlier and they separate, these slices are for you, and these slices of you are for you before they sit down to eat. One final point to today is what happens if a person who is fleshig sits down to talk with a person who's eating dairy. So you are fleshig, you're meat, which means you're within 6 hours of eating meat, and therefore you can't eat the milk. You're now sitting at a table talking to someone who's eating dairy. If that's the case, you're allowed to sit and talk to them. We're not worried that you're going to take the food, even if you're within the 6 hours. However, it's best to make sure that there's something on the table which is neutral, parav, that he's allowed to eat, or obviously something which would be meat that he's allowed to eat, in order to allow him to assuage his anxiety over the food. It's an interesting concept we find in Torah, that you don't want to see food and not be allowed to eat it. That's kind of cruel. For example, the waiter that serves at a table should be given to taste from every dish that's served to the table. Imagine if you're serving delicious food and you can not get to taste it, then it's considered like it's cruel. So there's a law in Torah that you're supposed to make sure that the waiter is allowed to have access to any one of the dishes that he serves. And same thing over here. If you're sitting at a table, you want to be able to eat something. It's called pas bisaloi, bread in your basket. When a person has bread in their basket, when they have some solution, some exit, something to hold on to, then they calm down. But if they have nothing to hold on to, that's when people get anxious and desperate and uncomfortable, and it's considered cruel. Okay? And that really concludes our session here for today. Somebody wanted to ask a question, would love to hear your comments. But generally speaking, just closing thoughts here. Meat and milk is vital for the health of your soul. As concerned as you are about coronavirus, or maybe the Delta variant, or making sure that you go to do your regular doctor visits. Same way, in order to maintain the health of your neshama, of your soul, you have to look in the operating manual of the one that made your soul. Who made your soul? It's God Almighty. In fact, God is your soul, because your soul is a piece of God. Therefore, we have to look in the Torah to be able to understand what it is that's going to give us the most sense of fulfillment and peace and happiness. Because you can cut corners. You can say, well, it's too extreme for me, I'm not interested. fine. You're biting off your nose you're cutting off your nose to spite your face, right? It's by recognizing and embracing the fact that our soul is a piece of God, and therefore our soul has needs like our body has needs, and those needs are prescribed to us in the Torah, the kosher diet. When we keep the kosher diet, when we're meticulous and careful to keep every day a little bit more than we kept yesterday when it comes to kosher, we will result in inner happiness, stability, peace of mind. What is that worth? Is that not priceless, right? Now, I understand it's a journey towards kosher. It is a journey towards kosher. Hey, Shmuley. It's a journey towards kosher, but one step at a time. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. If you can start one step at a time, take one thing that you try to adopt, discuss with your spouse, see if there's a way, or maybe if they don't agree, then try to do it on your own. Just to keep on growing one step at a time, to build your spirituality, to grow one step at a time. All right, folks, if you missed last night's beautiful discussion with Chabad of Dubai, that was really fantastic. An amazing experience meeting the Chabad of Dubai. And otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow morning, God willing, for the video Farbrengen with the Rebbe. Every Friday morning, we have a Farbrengen, but it's only on Zoom at jewishgardens.com/Zoom. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining me this morning. I'm going to say farewell. Have a lovely day, and shalom.